Hi, and welcome to AI in 2026. My name is Andrew Alker, and I'm a director in PwC's advisory practice. On today's episode, we'll be talking about trust by design and how organisations can use trust as a competitive moat. We'll also discuss emerging trends around responsible AI and ethics. I'm joined by Nicola Costello, PwC partner and digital and AI trust leader. Nick, thanks for joining me.
Hi Andrew, it's great to be here.
So Nicola, what are some of the discussions that boards are having around trust, and what are some of the questions that leaders within organisations need to be prepared for?
Such a great question. We've got boards and then also regulators. Boards are actively asking questions about how do we know where AI is being used in our organisations? How do we know that it provides the outcomes that we expect it to? How do we know that it's secure by design? And how do we know that it's not breaching any of our existing obligations that we have? So boards are now increasingly looking for transparency on how we're still meeting those obligations.
And are there certain things that you would consider as must-haves or requirements from a trust by design perspective when going from pilot to full enterprise scaling? Like what are those critical questions that we should be asking?
The first thing for me is when you went through the pilot phase, you should have had a risk assessment and you should have understood what are the specific risks for those use cases. So the question for me is, were those risks identified up front, and were the appropriate members of your different teams involved in that design and then implement and build process? And if they were, then you would get a level of trust that what you've built is able to be safely and securely deployed out more broadly. If they weren't, then you have to look at the design of that whole process again and build it back in again by design.
What do we need to be thinking about in terms of trust by design, not just from our own organisation's perspective, but the ecosystem and the partners that we're interacting with?
It's a great question. We've always talked about you can't outsource your risk, and the same comes when it looks at partners who are using AI. So the first thing is to, one, understand what is your risk posture and the controls and the trust that you require for AI deployment, whether that's in-house or at third parties. The second part is to bring your third-party teams along with you. So who is it that's in procurement or in third-party risk management that needs training, that needs upskilling, that needs support, so that they can then make sure that any parties that you interact with are maintaining those same standards and levels of trust that you would expect if this was owned internally. And then also, what's that ongoing assurance or trust that you get from those partners to make sure that they're still safely deploying and managing that AI? And if they have things like your customer data, that they're treating that with the same respect and concern that you would if it was within your own environment.
And Nicola, I've heard you a number of times in your travels talk about trust as being the biggest competitive advantage.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that a little bit? Why is that, in your view, one of the most crucial competitive advantages?
Trust for me underpins why people engage with organisations, and not just engage, but why they stay with them. Do I trust them with my information? Do I trust them with my clients or customer base? Do I trust them to help me achieve my objectives? As soon as you start to have mistrust in one aspect of a service from any provider or any organisation, it often permeates across all of your interactions with them. And we often then see that people move from that organisation, not for that one service, but for all services they have with that organisation.
So Nick, there may be a perception out there that balancing speed and ethical oversight and building trust by design can slow down innovation. How should organisations start to think about balancing speed and trust?
So I think organisations that slow down in the beginning to design trust and codify it within their processes, as I talked about earlier, are the ones who scale the fastest. So once you set up that trusted process, those guardrails, that means that as you roll out from 10 use cases to 1,000 use cases, you've streamlined that trust process, you've embedded it into those use case assessments. And that means you can accelerate because you're not unduly using resources in what might be a low risk use case versus deploying them to high risk use cases. So those organizations that spend that little bit of extra time at the beginning to design and embed trust will then be able to actually scale faster. But in that beginning stage, that's when I think people underestimate that investment is worth it in the longer term.
So Nick, let's talk about what's at stake when it comes to ethics and responsible AI. What are the potential consequences for organisations when they don't get this right?
So to summarise it, it can be anything ranging from customer loss, regulatory intervention, talent loss, forced shutdowns of systems, and really an inability to execute your business strategy. I don't believe people should have an AI strategy. People should have a business strategy, and AI should be a core component to enable getting at that strategy. And anything that stops, slows down, or draws attention away from that is a negative impact.
Thanks so much, Nick. And thanks for joining us on this episode of AI in 2026 on Trust by Design. We'll see you for the next episode.